Snow was falling in slow, lazy spirals, settling on the cracked pavement and the dark shoulders of the city. The street lamps glowed weakly, casting small circles of light onto the nearly empty sidewalks. It was the kind of winter night that bit into your bones and made the air taste like ice. On an old wooden bench at the corner of the park, a man sat alone. His suit, though once expensive, was wrinkled and frayed at the cuffs. His tie hung loose, his coat buttoned only halfway, as if he hadn't bothered to care. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, but the tremor in his shoulders betrayed the cold that had settled into him. He stared at the ground, eyes unfocused, like someone lost in a place far away from the snow around him. A few yards away, half hidden in the shadow of a lamppost, a young girl watched him. She couldn't have been more than 12, her face pale and thin under a knit cap that had seen better days. The blanket around her shoulders was faded and full of tiny holes, but it was the only thing standing between her and the winter air. She had been sitting there for hours, hoping to catch a kind stranger's eye for spare change, maybe enough for a cup of hot soup. But this man was different. There was something in his posture, not just the shiver of someone cold, but the slump of someone tired of the world. She noticed how his lips were pale, his breath barely visible. The girl hesitated. Every instinct told her to hold on to her blanket, it was all she had, and once the night deepened, the cold would only grow sharper. But another thought pressed against her heart, he looks colder than me. She stood, clutching the blanket tighter, and took a few cautious steps toward the bench. Her boots, too big for her feet, made soft crunches in the thin snow. The man didn't look up until she was standing right in front of him. Her voice, when it came, was soft and uncertain, but carried a warmth the winter couldn't steal. "You look cold, mister, you can use my blanket." The man blinked, startled. For a moment, he just stared at her, at the child with red-tipped ears, trembling hands, and eyes that held no fear, only quiet concern. He glanced at the worn piece of fabric she was offering, knowing it was probably the only shield she had against the night. Something in his chest tightened, not from the cold, but from the sheer impossibility of the moment. Here was a girl who had nothing, yet was willing to give the little she had. The snow kept falling, the world around them silent except for the hum of a distant streetlight. And in that frozen stillness, her small act of kindness cracked something open inside him, something he thought had frozen over long ago. The man's breath fogged in the air as he looked at the girl, still holding out her thin, patched blanket like it was the most natural thing in the world. You keep it," he said hoarsely, his voice rough as if unused to speaking. "You'll freeze without it." She shrugged, as if freezing was something she was already used to. "It's okay. You look colder than me." She gave a small, lopsided smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. For a moment, neither of them moved. The snow collected on the bench between them, a thin, icy barrier. Finally, he patted the space beside him. "Sit down, at least." She hesitated, then sat, her small frame barely taking up space. She wrapped the blanket back around her shoulders but angled it so it covered part of him too. It was an awkward arrangement, but strangely, the shared warmth felt different. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Lila." Her voice was steady, but there was a caution in it, like she'd learned not to trust too easily. "I'm Daniel." He glanced sideways at her. "Why are you out here alone, Lila?" Her fingers fiddled with a loose thread in the blanket. "I left home. My stepdad's not nice. My mom tries, but it's not enough. I just couldn't stay." She didn't look at him as she spoke, eyes fixed on the snowy ground. Daniel felt a knot in his chest. She said it so simply, as if running away and sleeping on cold streets was just another life choice. "How long have you been out here?" "A few weeks. Sometimes I stay at the shelter, but it's full a lot. So I just find spots where the police won't see me." She gave a small, almost proud smile. "I'm good at hiding." Daniel didn't return the smile. His gaze drifted to her thin gloves, the fingertips worn through, and the hollow under her cheekbones. "And the blanket?" he asked. "Got it from a lady who volunteers at the shelter. She said it's not much, but it's warm." She was right. Lila's tone softened. "When you don't have a lot, you take care of what you've got. But, sometimes, you can give it away too." Her words hung in the air, heavier than the snow around them. Daniel felt something stir deep inside, a memory of another time, another person, who had once told him almost the same thing. He didn't know it yet, but this fragile, stubborn child was about to shift the course of his life in ways neither of them could imagine. The wind picked up, rattling the branches above, but for the first time in months, Daniel felt something other than the cold. Daniel sat there, watching the little girl beside him pull the blanket tighter around their shoulders, her thin frame shaking slightly with every gust of wind. He felt the cold, yes, but more than that, he felt an ache he couldn't name. "You remind me of someone," he murmured, almost to himself. Lila tilted her head. "Who?" "My wife," he said after a pause. His voice carried a weight that made Lila glance up at him with curious eyes. "She used to say, kindness is the one thing you should never ration. No matter how little you have." Lila didn't answer right away, just studied him quietly. "Where is she now?" Daniel's throat tightened. He hadn't spoken about her in months, maybe years, not like this. "She's gone. Cancer." The word left his lips like a shard of ice. 3 years ago. Lila's eyes softened. "I'm sorry." He nodded, staring straight ahead. "After she passed, I stopped caring about most things. My company, my friends, even myself. I thought if I kept moving, kept doing business, I'd be okay. But the truth is," he gave a humorless chuckle, "I burned out. Sold the company. Lost the house. Walked away from everyone who still cared. Now I just drift." It sounded strange, saying it out loud. How far he'd fallen. He still had enough money to live, enough to get by, but not the will. He'd been wandering the city for weeks, pretending he was just taking time, but deep down he knew he'd been hiding. Lila looked at him for a long moment before asking, "So you're choosing to be out here?" Daniel exhaled. "I guess so. But sitting here tonight, I realized I haven't had a real conversation with anyone in a long time. Not since her." The girl hugged her blanket tighter. "I don't talk to many people either. Most just look past me. Or worse." She hesitated, then said quietly, "That's why I gave you the blanket. You looked like you needed someone to see you." Her words struck him harder than he expected. Someone to see you. It was something his wife used to say. That most people didn't need saving, they just needed to be seen, to feel like they mattered. Daniel swallowed, feeling the sting of tears behind his eyes. "Lila, you're out here with nothing, and yet you're giving away the only thing keeping you warm. Why?" She looked down at her boots, kicking at the snow. "Because I know what it's like to feel invisible. And I don't want anyone else to feel that way, if I can help it. Even if it's just a little." He stared at her, this child who had every reason to shut herself off from the world, yet still chose to give. Her words weren't dressed up, her kindness wasn't calculated, it was raw, instinctive. And suddenly, Daniel realized how far he had drifted from the man he once was. His wife had built their life on small acts of kindness, remembering birthdays, helping strangers, giving even when it hurt. He had let that flame die with her. But tonight, in the middle of a freezing park, a girl with nothing had relit it. Daniel shifted, pulling the blanket more securely around her shoulders. "Lila, you shouldn't be out here alone. It's not safe." She smirked faintly. "You shouldn't be out here either, mister." The snow fell harder now, coating their hair and shoulders, but Daniel barely felt it. For the first time in years, something was stirring inside him, not just sadness, but a sense of purpose he thought he'd buried forever. In that moment, he made a silent promise: whatever it took, this girl wouldn't spend another night alone on the streets. The wind had grown sharper, cutting through the layers of their clothes. Daniel stood up from the bench and brushed the snow from his lap. "Come on," he said, glancing down at Lila. She narrowed her eyes. "Where?" "To get you something warm to eat." His tone left little room for argument. Lila hesitated, her small hands clutching the blanket tighter. "I don't like going with strangers." Daniel gave a small nod of respect. "That's smart. You shouldn't. But you can walk a few steps behind me if it makes you feel safer. The diner's just across the street, it's bright, crowded, and you can leave whenever you want." She studied his face for a moment, then gave the faintest shrug. "Fine. But only because I'm starving." They crossed the street together, her boots crunching in the snow, his steps slower so she could keep up. The diner's warm glow spilled onto the sidewalk, the smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee drifting out as they opened the door. Inside, the blast of heat was almost overwhelming after the cold. They slid into a booth by the window, and a waitress with tired eyes and a kind smile brought menus. "Order whatever you want," Daniel told her. Lila's eyes scanned the menu as if she were reading a treasure map. "Can I, really?" "Yes." She bit her lip, as if unsure if he was serious, before finally pointing to pancakes, scrambled eggs, and hot chocolate. When the waitress left, Daniel ordered coffee and a burger for himself. For a few minutes, they sat in silence, the sound of clinking cutlery and sizzling grills filling the space between them. Lila rubbed her hands together, staring out at the snow. "You don't have to do this, you know," she said suddenly. "Do what?" "Feed me. Be nice. People don't usually care." Daniel leaned back, his eyes soft. "Maybe they should." When the food arrived, Lila dug in with a hunger that spoke of many skipped meals. Daniel watched her eat, not in pity, but in quiet thought. Every bite she took seemed to strengthen something in him, as if her survival was slowly reminding him of his own reasons to keep going. Halfway through the meal, he excused himself, stepping into the diner's small hallway near the restrooms. He pulled out his phone for the first time in days. He scrolled through his contacts until he found a number he hadn't dialed in years. "John," he said when the line picked up. A pause. "Daniel? I thought you'd fallen off the grid." "I need a favor," Daniel said. "There's a girl, 12, maybe 13, living on the streets. I want her in a safe shelter tonight. The good one. The one with the youth program you used to donate to. You know those spots are hard to come by. I don't care. Pull strings. Call whoever you have to." His voice was firm. "I'll cover every expense. And I want to meet the director tomorrow." John hesitated, then said, "All right. Text me the details." Daniel ended the call, slipping the phone back into his pocket. He took a moment to steady himself before returning to the table. Lila had finished nearly all her food and was sipping the last of her hot chocolate. "You were gone a while," she said, raising an eyebrow. "Just making sure you're not sleeping outside tonight." Her eyes narrowed. "And what if I don't want to go to a shelter?" "Then you can tell me no," Daniel said simply. "But I think you deserve somewhere warm. Just for one night. You can decide the rest after." Lila looked at him for a long time, her expression unreadable. Finally, she muttered, "One night. That's it." They left the diner together, stepping back into the snow. Daniel's car, a modest sedan, was parked just down the street. Lila hesitated again before getting in, but the diner's warmth still lingered in her bones, and she figured one more hour in the cold might break her resolve. As they drove toward the shelter, Daniel kept glancing at her from the corner of his eye. She stared out the window, tracing patterns in the frost with her finger. He didn't tell her about the call. He didn't tell her that tomorrow, she'd have a bed, hot meals, clothes, and people trained to help kids like her. He didn't tell her that he was already thinking about finding her a school, a mentor, and maybe, just maybe, a place to belong. Tonight, it was enough to let her believe it was just dinner and a bed for one night. But deep inside, Daniel knew he was going to change her life. And, without realizing it, she had already started to change his. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the narrow windows of the youth shelter. The snow had stopped sometime during the night, leaving the city wrapped in a blanket of white. Inside, the air smelled faintly of oatmeal and laundry soap, simple, but warm. Lila sat on the edge of a real bed, her legs swinging slightly above the floor. The mattress wasn't soft, the sheets weren't fancy, but it was clean. And for the first time in weeks, she'd slept without waking every hour to the fear of footsteps or the bite of cold wind. Daniel arrived mid-morning, carrying a paper bag that gave off the unmistakable scent of fresh pastries. She spotted him through the hallway and instantly tried to mask the flicker of relief on her face. "You're still here?" she asked as he stepped into the small common room. "I told you I'd be back," he said, setting the bag down on the table. "Brought breakfast." She eyed him warily, though the cinnamon rolls in the bag seemed to weaken her defenses. "One night, remember? That was the deal." Daniel smiled faintly. "I remember. But I was hoping you'd hear the rest of my offer before you disappear again." She frowned. "What offer?" He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "I spoke with the shelter director this morning. There's a spot in their youth program for you, meals, clothes, tutoring, even a counselor to help you figure out your next steps. You don't have to stay forever, but you wouldn't have to be out there anymore." Lila didn't respond right away. She picked at the corner of the pastry bag, her face carefully guarded. "People always want to help at first," she said finally. "Then they get tired. Or busy. Or they stop caring." Daniel leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "I'm not going to stop caring, Lila." Her eyes searched his for a long time, as if trying to find the lie. When she didn't see one, she gave a small shrug. "Maybe I'll stay. For a little while." He didn't push further. Trust wasn't built in a day, and he knew better than to rush it. Over the next week, Daniel visited every day. Sometimes he brought food, sometimes books, sometimes nothing at all, just himself, ready to listen. Lila began to thaw, bit by bit. She told him about the little bakery near her old neighborhood where she used to stand outside, breathing in the smell of bread she couldn't afford. She told him about the library where she'd sneak in to read, hiding from the cold. And Daniel began to talk, too. About his wife, her laugh, her stubbornness, the way she believed in helping strangers simply because it was the right thing to do. About the company he'd built and walked away from. About how, until Lila, he hadn't seen a reason to start over. One afternoon, he arrived at the shelter with a surprise, a new winter coat, sturdy boots, and gloves. Lila stared at the pile of clothes on the table. "These are for me." "They're for someone who shouldn't have to choose between being warm and being kind," Daniel said. Her cheeks flushed, but she tried to hide her smile. "They're okay, I guess." 2 months later, Lila was no longer the shivering girl huddled in the corner of a park. She had color in her cheeks, a spark in her eyes, and a habit of making the younger kids at the shelter laugh. Daniel had reconnected with some of his old contacts, quietly using his resources to fund improvements at the shelter, better heating, more beds, more staff. He'd even started consulting again, not because he needed the money, but because the work felt purposeful again. One crisp spring morning, as Lila was getting ready to head out with a volunteer for a school supply trip, she found a box sitting on her bed. Inside was her old, faded blanket, washed, mended, and folded neatly. On top was a small note in Daniel's handwriting. "For someone who needs it next." She ran down the hall and found him waiting near the entrance. "You fixed it," she said, holding up the blanket. "I thought it should keep doing what it's good at," he replied with a soft smile. "Just like you." Lila didn't say anything, she just threw her arms around him in a hug that spoke more than words. Outside, the city was waking up, the snow long melted, the air carrying the promise of change. And as they stepped out together, Daniel realized something he hadn't in years: he wasn't just living again, he was looking forward to tomorrow.